welcome to our first Friday forum. I'm Diana Martin, and I am the brand new executive director here at Hourglass. I'm really looking forward to getting to know each of you. And I'm so excited to be kicking off my first week by talking about a subject that's really near and dear to my heart, farmland preservation. I'm joined today by Karen Martynick, executive director, and Jeffrey Swinehart, the chief operating officer of Lancaster Farmland Trust. They'll be discussing their newly published report on the state of farmland preservation here in Lancaster County, as well as their new Honoring the Promise campaign. I know that this will be a really interesting conversation. Before we get started, I'd like to thank our first Friday forum sponsor, Rogers and Associates. Their support makes these forums possible and help us to bring important discussions to the community. I'd also like to thank the Ware Center at Millersville University, where we plan to move back to in-person First Friday forums next month, pending the status of the coronavirus pandemic. As we get started with our conversation, if you have any questions for Karen and Jeff, please drop them in the Q&A function. We'll have about 15 minutes for audience questions starting at 12:45. So without any further ado, let's jump in. Jeff and Karen, welcome. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks for having us, Diana. We're happy to be here.
Yes, thank you.
So as I mentioned, Lancaster Farmland Trust recently published a very comprehensive report on the state of farmland preservation here in Lancaster County. If anyone hasn't seen that report yet, I'm actually going to drop a link to it in the chat. It's really interesting, and I encourage you all to check it out. Can you give us a little background on this report? What inspired you to produce it, and maybe what surprised you as you were putting it together? What did you find out?
Well, Lancaster County has been preserving farmland for since the early 1980s, has been a leader in the state and in the country in farmland preservation. Lancaster Farmland Trust has been preserving farmland since 1988. And I think we all, just about everybody in the county knows that Lancaster County has a lot of preserved farmland. But we also knew that there was a lot that people didn't know, and that we didn't know, and that people hadn't kept up with. That farmland preservation had become such a part of what Lancaster County does and is, but people hadn't necessarily kept up with what was really going on in farmland preservation. And we wanted to find out what that was as well. And so we decided to, we started having discussions about producing some kind of research paper, some kind of report. And it kind of grew as we went along. And as it turned out, we learned a lot in the process as well.
Unmute myself, play the Zoom game. As you mentioned, Lancaster County is currently #1 in the nation for the number of acres of farmland that we've preserved. We've actually preserved more than 115,000 acres, or roughly 19% of the county's land area. Can you give us some background on kind of how we got here? How did we hit that incredible milestone, and what did it take to preserve the current over 1,500 farms that we have preserved here in Lancaster?
Yeah, it's a great question, Diana. And if you can pull up, I believe it's page 14 in the report, and it has a map that shows all of the farms preserved in Lancaster County, which I think is a good visual. And you can really recognize on this map, especially in the northwestern part of the county, in the Donegal areas, you just see the concentration of protected farmland there. And that's really where the movement started. So, it takes somebody to be inspired. And that particular family up there was the Garber family. Many people know of Gene Garber and his family. Gene was a relief pitcher in major leagues for a number of years, but really as a farmer at heart, and is currently farming. But his family really started the movement in that northwestern section. And you can just see the impact that that's had over the years. You can go to areas in the Donegal region and sit at a crossroads, and literally everything you see around you is permanently preserved. So, that's where it got started. Obviously, you can't have a successful farmland preservation program unless you have farmers who are willing to permanently protect their land. And it started out slow as anything, but I think, it became much more acceptable. I think the agricultural community, farm families started recognizing the growth pressures that were happening in Lancaster County. I knew that they needed to take some action, and that permanently protecting their land was one way of doing that. So, first and foremost, it's the commitment of the families, but locally, our municipalities have done a pretty good job in terms of local zoning ordinances that prevents the conversion of agricultural land. So that certainly, plays a big part in terms of what the landscape looks like. And then if you look at, the county has been instrumental in terms of funding for farmland preservation over the years. And then in the late 80s, we had the start of the state farmland preservation program, and Lancaster County has been very successful at accessing dollars at the state level as well as at the federal level. And then you tie in, a public-private partnership that you have between Lancaster Farmland Trust and the Lancaster County Ag Preserve Board. And when you factor all that in, you can start to see why Lancaster County leads the nation. I mean, we do a lot of outreach, we do a lot of engagement with the community. We generally serve a different segment of the agricultural community than the Ag Preserve Board. So it's sort of that relationship and dynamic that really, contributes to the overall success. And then you have a public that's extremely supportive of it. The county, through Places 2040, when they were developing the comprehensive plan, got a lot of input from county residents, and one of the top issues was farmland preservation. So you can see when you have all of those in, why we're leading the nation in farmland preservation.
Thanks, Jeff. Some of the benefits of farmland preservation might seem obvious, like access to fresh food and kind of beautiful open spaces in our community. What are some of the other benefits of preserving this farmland that might not be top of mind?
Yeah, it's, I think everybody does think about, they drive around and they see the beautiful landscapes and they see the silos dotted across, and that's what people think about, or the roadside stand, that they stop. I think about my drive from Manheim Township into Strasburg on a daily basis, and depending which way I go, I can pass half a dozen, maybe 10 roadside stands. So I think, there's direct benefits that people experience, but some of the benefits that probably aren't so apparent is one, the farmland preservation effort, can be a growth management tool. When farms are permanently protected, they can't be converted into some other use, so that obviously that impacts sort of the growth pattern in any particular municipality. It also helps with the tax base. Cornfields and alfalfa fields, they don't go to school, they don't need fire and police service, they don't need a community pool. So when you start thinking about that, the protection of agricultural land and keeping it in farmland really contributes to the overall tax base and not demanding a lot of services. And there's been a number of cost of community services that demonstrate, for every dollar that farmland puts in, they get about 7 cents on average worth of services. That's not the same in the residential sector. A residential home typically consumes more services in terms of cost than what they contribute back into the tax base. And then there's a whole host of environmental benefits. Water quality elements, habitat related elements. We think about climate change these days. We have a lot of farmers out there that have good management practices like no-till and cover crops in place. Our easements, when farmers preserve, they're required to have conservation plans that call out those practices. And when implemented, and continuously implemented, we're storing a lot of carbon in the ground by way of that. So those are some of the benefits that people might not necessarily see or sort of feel.
Yeah, I think it's been really exciting. A lot of momentum behind the idea of carbon sequestration, or this idea of carbon farming, that we actually can start to mitigate some of the effects of climate change by how we farm and store carbon back in our soils. So it's really exciting to see that happening here in Lancaster. It's no secret that our population is rapidly growing in Lancaster County. We have added 180,000 residents since 1980. how is this growth impacting our area's agriculture and farmland preservation?
It's a good question, and really is closely tied to why we did the report. When Places 2040, the county's still new county comprehensive plan was released, it was clear from that the population of Lancaster County the population growth was not going to slow down, and that according to Places 2040, the population was projected to grow by about 110,000 people by 2040. And we already know that our agricultural land is under pressure from development. Jeff mentioned zoning. Most of our municipalities are doing a really good job at zoning, but as that development pressure increases, we know that zoning is temporary and therefore can be changed. And that development will put increasing pressure on agricultural land to be sold and developed. And so we recognize from that, with that population growth, that the pressure on farming on farmers will continue to increase. And that doesn't only mean that farmland will be developed, but it also means that if we're not careful and development becomes more scattered and new people move in, they want to live next to a farm, but they don't like the smells and they don't like the dust and they don't like the noise, or they don't like the farm equipment on the road, or that it just becomes dangerous for farmers to be out on the road, especially in Lancaster County where we have such a significant plainset community. All of those things put pressure on farmers, on farming, and on our agricultural land. And as we look out to 2040, and we know that the population is going to continue to increase, being able to protect land and do it in contiguous blocks so farmers can farm, and we can still enjoy the benefits of their farming and accommodate growth at the same time.
Thank you, Karen. Let's talk dollars. What does it cost to preserve farmland in Lancaster County, and where does that funding come from? You outline in your report how some of that funding has changed over the decades. So if you could kind of bring us up to speed on what that looks like today. Well,
funding comes from a lot of different sources. It makes it pretty complicated when you try to put it all together. But the primary funding for farmland preservation in Lancaster County, or the primary program, is the Lancaster County Agricultural Preserve Board. That is a state program that's administered by county government, by a board appointed by the county commissioners. The county each year puts up a certain amount of money, and then based on a formula that is matched with state dollars that come from a tobacco tax. And that funding, there's a chart that you've just put up. That funding has the contribution from the county has been up and it's been down. The trend since the early 2000s is that it has gone down. The county match has gone down, and therefore, or the county portion has gone down, and therefore the state match has gone down. So that's kind of the state part of it. And then Lancaster Farmland Trust, of course, does the same kind of work as the Ag Preserve Board, but we are a private organization. And so the majority of our funding comes from private individuals, businesses, and foundations who support farmland preservation. We have for now a number of years received a matching challenge grant from the county commissioners, which has also gone up and down. It was as high as $1 million. This year it is $250,000. I think the one important thing to note when we're looking at funding in general is that as you look at this chart, funding over the last 20 years has decreased substantially. And it was at its height in 2001 when the county commissioners decided to do a bond issue to to further the investment in farmland preservation. And you can see that just below the chart on funding, you can see there that the number of acres that were preserved correspond to the funding that's been available. And so in the early 2000s, you had these spikes in the number of acres that were preserved, but that has declined since then. When you think about the question that I answered previously about the growth in the county, you've got growth continuing to increase, and you've got funding and acres preserved decreasing, which is not a good combination. If we're going to see increase in population, and we really want to protect what's special about Lancaster County and our rich productive farmland, then that funding, wherever it comes from, is critically important. And then I would just add one other thing. There are federal dollars, some federal dollars that are available through the agricultural land easement program, and that the county, both the county and Lancaster Farmland Trust, have taken advantage of the federal funding as well.
And I'll just add to that, Diana, you know, when you look and in the report, you can see in terms of Lancaster Farmland Trust portfolio, you know, over the 530 easements, it's now 532 easements that we hold, you know, it's over $95 million worth of value. But, you know, many of our farmers do not receive full value for the preservation of their farm in terms of what their development rights are worth. We never pay full value, only about 25%. So we've amassed 32,000 acres permanently preserved here at LFT for a bit under $17 million, which is about 17% of market value, and works out to be about $545 per acre. Now, obviously, that's an average over all of that. Costs have risen over the years. But when you think about the quality of land and market access that we have here in Lancaster County, and being able to preserve it for essentially pennies on the dollar in terms of what the actual value is, it just really speaks volumes of why the program is important, and why it needs to continue.
Well, and also why it's important to do it now, because land values, the other part of this is, as development increases, the land values will increase, and it'll be harder and harder to preserve land as we move forward.
Yeah, thanks for running through some of that history. How many farms currently in Lancaster County are waiting to be preserved? I understand that there is a pretty significant waiting list. Can you tell us a little bit about what these farms that are waiting to be preserved, what they look like, and what can happen if they're not protected?
There's about 250 farm families between Lancaster Farmland Trust and the Lancaster County Ag Preserve Board who are waiting to be preserved. We have 50 of those on our waiting list. It's one of the reasons our board elected to pursue a capital campaign that we'll touch on in a little bit. But these farms, it's almost all farms in Lancaster County are family owned and have been in the same family for generations. And that land ethic and commitment really runs deep, and it really drives why they want to preserve. But the operations themselves, they vary. Our farms here in Lancaster County, in comparison to other farms across the nation, are really small because we have really productive land, an average, 75 acres in size. And they range from your typical dairy operation to poultry. We are starting to see farms transition out of dairy, because it's been extremely challenging over the last couple of years, and more into produce and more niche markets. And again, when you think about our location to markets, Baltimore, DC, Philly, New York, and you can go to farm stands there, and you can go to restaurants there, and they market their sourcing products from Lancaster County. So the impact that we have, is beyond just here locally. I mean, it's really regionally in terms of the East Coast. But if those farms aren't preserved, farm families need to make decisions. And there certainly is the risk that they have to put the farm up for sale, and it gets sold, at public auction, and goes to the highest bidder. And who knows who that highest bidder is? It could be, a developer who buys it on speculation that they're going to hold it for 10 years and, hope or try to get the land rezoned. or it might fall outside of the family and, prevents the second generation from really being able to work alongside the first generation in the farming operation. So it's really critical when a farm family decides they want to preserve that we can act quickly and respond to that, because if we can't, there certainly is the opportunity that we lose the possibility of preserving that farm.
Yeah, 250 farms waiting to be preserved. That's a pretty significant number. Karen, you mentioned earlier, in the next 20 years, Lancaster County is expected to add another 100,000 residents. How should we be thinking about smart growth in a way we can balance this population increase with farmland preservation, particularly as we're seeing more of that growth in rural areas?
A great question. And I mentioned Places 2040. If the people who are listening in have not yet looked at Places 2040, there's an executive summary that's available on the Planning Commission's website. Basically, if we're going to preserve what is special about Lancaster County and we're going to continue to support agriculture, then we've got to grow smartly. We're not going to stop people from moving here. We're not going to stop families from growing. And so we need to make sure that if we are going to accommodate that growth, we do it smartly. And there are a number of ways to do that that Places 2040 outlines. The principal way is to ensure that we grow more within our urban growth boundaries, that we increase density in those areas. And for some people, a lot of people say that they think it's a good idea to support smart growth and that density is important. But we have to remember that we can't oppose every development that has that increased density once it comes about. And then rural growth is probably the most difficult to accommodate. But there are village growth areas in various parts of Lancaster County around small villages now. And Places 2040 outlines how we can grow smartly within those village growth areas as well. But really increasing density, using the land that we have more wisely, the land that's designated for growth, and ensuring that we can accommodate growth within the areas that are designated for that growth.
Yeah, the report did a great job of highlighting that we're not really hitting those density goals as a community. We're in the smart growth planning. We'd like to be building in those designated city urban areas at over 7 dwellings per acre. And right now we're averaging just over 4 dwellings per acre. So we're going to go through that land a little bit faster if we're not building at that high density in the designated growth areas.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And working with municipal officials and developers to ensure that those density targets are met is really important.
Mm-hmm. One thing that was really highlighted in the report that you put together is that it's important to preserve large contiguous blocks of farmland. Can you talk about why that's important and how our county and our townships can be thinking about that?
Yeah, Diana, protecting those large contiguous blocks are really important. And thinking in the context of, if you are a farmer and you own a piece of land, but nothing around you is preserved and you're contemplating permanently preserving your farm, and you start looking at the prospects of, well, I don't know if that neighboring property is going to get developed or conveyed to some other use, and it starts to cause some hesitation naturally. So conversely to that, if there is a farm family that's considering preserving, but they have 3 adjacent farms and they're all preserved, they're assured that their neighbors aren't going to be converted into some other use. So it provides, a higher level of confidence that, actually preserving their farm is a good decision because they don't have to worry about the threat of conversion on neighboring farms. So that's really important from that element. And we've seen in some areas, a lot of areas in the county, when when you get that first farm preserved, it becomes a lot easier to preserve farms around it. And farmers talk a lot. The communication line is free flowing. So then, that helps to build momentum and interest there as well. And the way that municipalities and the county can be engaged in that is, municipalities in terms of their zoning ordinances, if there's consistency in their ordinances from one municipality to another, especially in their ag zone, that can help protect that. Working collectively and collaboratively together related to official maps, as an example, which really highlights what the future land uses are, so that we're not having conflicting land uses with our agricultural landscape. We touched on the environmental benefits, but when you have contiguous blocks of land protected that might have a stream flowing through all of it, it provides the opportunity where you can do restoration improvements on that stream and not have it being fragmented by development or something like that. And then other elements at the local level is, townships can enroll farms in ag security areas. We have some townships that, almost all of their ag zone land is enrolled in ag security areas. We have other, townships that, a very small percentage of their land is enrolled in ag security areas. And ag security areas isn't permanent protection, but it's a tool that provides the opportunity for permanent protection in the future and helps to assure some of that conversion doesn't happen. So it's more of a temporary type of tool, but it's still critical in the mix.
I could just add something to what Jeff said. The other thing about contiguous acres is municipalities need to work together. The idea of regional planning, and because in Pennsylvania, uniquely, all land use is vested in local municipalities, and contiguous blocks of farmland spill over into multiple municipalities, or can spill. We want it to. So it's critically important that as municipal officials do their zoning practices, their ag security areas, that their zoning ordinances and their ag security areas, that they're talking to their neighbors. And as we will get to later on, but this idea of the municipalities being critical in the preservation of farmland and smart growth is something that is probably the most important thing that I think comes out of our report and Places 2040.
Thank you. Let's look at a case study here from Lancaster County. Your report outlines Warwick Township that has developed a TDR program, or transfer of development rights, and that's really starting to work to help preserve farmland in Warwick. Can you give us an example of how a recognizable project like Rock Lidditz has used that program to help preserve farms?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a good example of another tool that a municipality can implement to help protect farmland. And there are 6 municipalities in the county that have TDR programs, ordinances that permit that. But there's a lot of other opportunities out there. But a project like Rock Lidditz, so great in terms of impact to the economy, jobs, all those sort of things that you want. And in Warwick Township, in their campus industrial zone, they in their zoning ordinance really limit lot coverage. It's a 10% lot coverage, which in that type of use is extremely restrictive. Generally, it's 70% lot coverage. But the builder, the business, can increase that lot coverage up to 70%, but they need to buy TDRs to do that. So in the Rock Lidditz example, based on the footprint of buildings and parking areas and impervious surfaces, they needed to acquire 149 TDRs. And Lancaster Farmland Trust and the township, we're out there active in the community, acquiring TDRs from farms. Those farms are then permanently preserved, and we're holding those TDRs. So as developers, these sort of projects come along, we have that stockpile of those TDRs, and then we can sell them to a place like Rock Lidditz, and they can construct their facility. In Rock Lidditz's case, it was a $450,000 purchase of TDRs. Those dollars come back and then are extended out to preserve additional farmland, then acquiring more TDRs. And you can see it's sort of this revolving system that happens. And in Warwick Township, it's been extremely effective and successful over the years, and arguably probably one of the most successful TDR programs in the state. I know, at Lancaster Farmland Trust, we've done at least a dozen different transactions between either acquiring TDRs or selling TDRs over the course of the years.
Yeah, that sounds like a really interesting program. So effectively, if someone wants to develop at a higher density, maybe a taller building or more impervious surface, they can offset that high building density by protecting farmland somewhere else in the municipality, or maybe even the future, even somewhere else in the county.
Yeah, that's right. It's really, there can be a lot of flexibility and creativeness in terms of TDR ordinances, and I think, at least currently right now, that's one of the challenges, because the TDR ordinances vary substantially across those who have them. And some have been very successful and very active, like a Warwick Township. There's other municipalities that have TDR ordinances on the books, but really haven't been utilized because there's some barriers or some challenges associated with them actually really being effective.
Our neighbors in Chester County have employed a dedicated tax for farmland preservation. Your report proposes a referendum to determine public support for a farmland preservation tax here in Lancaster County. Can you talk a little bit about what that could look like?
Sure. First of all, the report has a number of recommendations, and we divide them up between what the state can do, what the county can do, what local municipalities can do, what Lancaster Farmland Trust and the Ag Preserve Board can do, and then what citizens can do. And one of the things that we talk about, we have a case study in the report about Honeybrook Township in Chester County, which of course is the immediate neighbor to Carnarvon Township in the northeast section. But Chester County did a referendum in 1989, and it passed. It was to authorize the expenditure of $50 million for the preservation of open space, including farmland. And it passed with about 83%, I think, of the vote. And that led to a real boom in Chester County's efforts to preserve open space and farmland. And from that, they developed what's called the Challenge Grant Program, in which they incentivize municipalities to put their own money up, municipal money up to preserve farmland and open space. And they do that by offering, I think now it's 55% of the cost of a preservation project, and the municipality has to put up 45% of that project. And that has led to a number of Chester County municipalities implementing some kind of open space tax. As a matter of fact, 33 municipalities in Chester County have some kind of preservation tax to support preservation projects. And for the most part, it's a percentage of the earned income tax that's dedicated to that. And this case study that we do about Honeybrook Township in the report is an earned income tax. And the results are striking as to how much land has been protected as a result of that. The reason that we decided to put that as one of the calls to action for the county is because we have seen, as I mentioned earlier, this drop in funding. And county commissioners have a lot of different demands. They have many things that they need to consider when they put together a budget. And we think that perhaps considering a countywide referendum to support either a bond issue for open space, that would give them some idea of how the community feels about protecting open space. We think in terms of timing, this is a critical time to do it. When Chester County did their referendum back in 1989, the county was already seeing a tremendous amount of growth and land values were ballooning. And so by the time all of it was put in place, and all the programs were put in place, land values were so high that it was really expensive to preserve land. Lancaster County is kind of at a crossroads right now, and as we talked about the development that's coming, if we don't do something soon, it will become increasingly difficult to preserve land going forward.
And Diana, just to add to that, because Karen, referenced about at the county level, but even at the local level, while ordinances like TDRs are one tool, certainly a municipality like Karen referenced, there's 33 in Chester County, could go through the process of a referendum, to have a local earned income tax. And I truly believe moving forward that local communities are going to have to become more active, financially in terms of protecting open space in general, but specifically farmland. Because if we just rely on the county and rely on the state, and try and outpace development, that's probably a losing proposition in that regards. But if local communities decide internally to start to do some of this, it's a greater prospect.
And if you look historically across the country, these kinds of referendum have been put up. This kind of referenda has been put up in many places. And I think it has a success rate that approaches 90%. Wow. So it's clear that people want open space. It's clear that people support farmland preservation. Lancaster Farmland Trust did a survey a few years ago, and I think over 80% of people were in favor of would pay an increase in their taxes in order to preserve more open space and farmland. So we think that this would have a good chance, whether it was done on a municipal level or a county level. And certainly a municipality is facing a lot of growth and sees the loss of farmland. It would be a great way for them to be able to protect what's left of their township.
You mentioned that the report gives a number of other recommendations at the state, county, municipal, even citizen level for preserving farmland. Can you touch on a few of those other recommendations, what we can do to get involved if we care about this issue?
Yeah, you're right. There is a number of recommendations in there, and we've referenced Places 2040 a lot. So obviously municipalities accepting the county's recommendations and implementing them, is certainly one of the elements that we've stressed. We've talked a lot about the county. We specifically call out for the county to double the investment in farmland preservation, which would be a $125 million investment by 2030, which is significant. But at the same time, we call on preservation organizations like ourselves and like the Ag Preserve Board to double the number of acres we're going to protect by 2040. So, you need the resources to do it, but we also need to be out there and talking with farmers and getting them committed to be able to do that. And when you look at, funding overall, private land trusts have no access to state dollars for farmland preservation. Unlike the protection of open space or natural areas that can go through the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources and get, upwards of 50 or 60% of what the project costs. For farmland preservation for land trust, there is no opportunity to do that. So, we have been working with Senator Martin locally here, who was the prime sponsor on Senate Bill 64, which would provide some access for land trust to fund state funding for farmland preservation. And then, linking preservation and conservation. Water quality is a big issue in Lancaster County. Climate change issues are really starting to emerge, and linking the preservation of land with good management practices on those land is really a critical element as well.
Speaking of getting the resources, tell us about your new Honoring the Promise campaign you recently launched to raise $7.5 million to preserve the 50 farms that are currently on Lancaster Farmland Trust waiting list. How is that going, and how can people get involved?
Thanks for asking. As Jeff mentioned, one of the action items is for us to work harder. And about 3 years ago, our board of trustees looked at this growing waiting list of farms. We used to be able to tell a farmer that their land would be preserved within 6 months. And it was starting to take us longer and longer, 2 to 3 years in some cases. The waiting list continued to grow, farmers continued to call. And so, we looked in the mirror and said, what can we do to pick up the pace of farmland preservation? And we considered a lot of options. We did a feasibility study for a capital campaign, and it came back and told us that they thought that the community would support our efforts. And so we launched our Honoring the Promise campaign to raise $7.5 million. We did a lot of planning and we put a great campaign plan in place. It considered a lot of options. It did not consider the option of a worldwide pandemic, which hit not too long after we launched the campaign. But we have, of the $7.5 million goal, we have raised just over $7.2 million so far. So a little ways to go, but not too much. Hopefully we will have raised enough to preserve all 50 farms that were on the waiting list when we started the campaign, which is about 4,000 acres of additional farmland preserved. But it was one way that we knew that we could pick up the pace of preservation. And just as I said, the community has been so supportive of farmland preservation. Our Honoring the Promise campaign is another example of how the community has rallied around the effort to protect Lancaster County's rich, productive farmland. We launched the public phase of the campaign. Of course, you go through the quiet phase with your closest donors and supporters. We launched the public phase on June 24th, and so far the response has been great. And we, of course, encourage and invite anyone who's interested to go to our website. The campaign website is www.savelancasterfarms.org, and support us and learn more about it. But even maybe for everyone, there's a great video on the website that shows some of the most beautiful farmland that in the country. And so I would just encourage people to go there just to look at the video.
And for anyone who would like to support, there is a match opportunity. So we were very fortunate and grateful to the Steinman Foundation, who awarded Lancaster Farmland Trust largest ever grant of $2 million that we've ever received, and their largest award ever that they've made to an organization. So that's a dollar for dollar match that's available for anybody who would like to take advantage of that.
Well, congratulations already on raising the $7.2 million for the campaign. That's a really incredible feat for our whole community who's going to benefit from that farmland preservation. We're getting so many awesome questions from our audience, so I want to kick it over to some of our audience questions. Thank you all for being here and being so engaged. Our first question came in from Dan, who's joining us, and I'm going to almost read it verbatim because it's a great question. What do you say to the farmland preservation naysayers who claim that preservation doesn't make sense for many smaller family farms because of the increasing difficulty in making a decent living from farming? Do you have any data on our farm profitability here in Lancaster County? So how are you thinking about this when you're preserving farms that are profitable?
Yeah, I mean, farmers in Lancaster County are entrepreneurs, and agriculture has been successful here because farm families can adapt, and they can change, and can make shifts as the marketplace's demands on them. And I would even say to our smaller farm families, there's smaller farms that are out there, we see a significant growth in produce production as an example, which you're typically not going to do on a 75-acre farm. It's just too labor intensive. But a 20-acre farm is certainly a viable, size property for that type of operation. So I think it's the protection of the land and making sure that that resource is available. That's the critical piece here. Farmers themselves will figure out how to be profitable. And, within the agricultural community, it's just like any other business, venture out there in terms of individuals. Some are very savvy and make good decisions, others do not. That's just the reality of it. But, when we see farms going up for sale, as an example, They're selling at high prices, and in most cases selling to farmers because farmers want that land. They need it. They need that land.
The other thing I would add to Jeff's comments is we need to always be cognizant of making land available and affordable for new farmers, for starting farmers. And one of the things that preservation does, at least theoretically, is hold the price of that land down. And so that reduces the capital cost for getting into farming for a younger farmer, a new farmer starting out. And so I also think this is probably I've thought about this a couple times in our forum so far, but this is probably an appropriate place to talk a little bit about climate change. And we have the most productive non-irrigated soils in the country. If you look at what's happening out west, where so much of our food is grown, or down south with the extensive storms and increasing number of storms, this land becomes more critical in terms of food security and security generally. And so this is an investment in the future of the country. This is a way to make land available for new farmers. And so there's a lot of other things that when we think about farmland preservation, it's not just about the view.
Yeah, essentially so that beginning farmers, if they are trying to purchase land, they're not having to compete with developers over that purchase. We have another question from Sam. He wants to know, what's the optimal total acreage of Lancaster County preserved farmland? Is the goal to preserve all of our existing farmland? Is there a max? Kind of what does the future of that look like?
We get this question a lot. And it's, I'm not sure that you can tag a number onto it. I think there is a critical point in the critical mass of land that's protected that ensures that the infrastructure associated with the agricultural community can thrive here. And I think that's hard to know what that amount is. Not only does agriculture in Lancaster County, in terms of infrastructure, is critically important here, it's also critically important regionally. We have folks from other counties, from other states who come to Lancaster for their agricultural supply needs because their particular town or community doesn't have it because, they left long ago. So, is 115,000 acres enough to do that? I don't think so. Is it all of the farmland in the county? Maybe. Are we going to protect all of it? Probably not. But there is a tipping point there at some point where and I think you start to see when the infrastructure starts to leave is when you've probably not protected enough land because those businesses are going to go to where, they have the assurance that they can be profitable.
One of the things that we mentioned in the report is that Lancaster County currently has over 350,000 acres that are neither preserved nor developed. And so I have a question back in response to that question, and it is, how much of that do you want that 357,000 acres to be developed? Or how much of it do you want to be developed? I think that's the more appropriate question when we think about quality of life issues. How much of that land do we want to be developed?
Yeah, so a significant part of our farmland is still at risk of being developed here in Lancaster County. I'm going to pull another audience question. This is from one of our audience members, Dan. He wants to know about what kind of flexibility Lancaster Farmland Trust allows when it comes to writing one of these preservation easements. An example he gives is if a farm owner wants to put a winery on their land, they want to grow grapes, but they're going to have this business that they want to develop there. Would that be possible under the preservation easement? That there's kind of a misconception right now that these preservation easements are so tight and restrictive that they might not allow you to make changes on your farm. So what does that actually kind of look like on the ground?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there are a lot of misconceptions out there about farmland preservation and easements and what do they do. At the end of the day, our primary goal is making sure that that land is available for agricultural use, and that's what we're trying to achieve. That doesn't get converted into something else. So, an example of like a winery, if they had vineyards, on there and, they're producing wine and they're marketing, that from the farm because they're growing the grapes to produce the wine. That's an agricultural operation. It's an agricultural product. They're permitted to do that. So, there's a fair amount of flexibility within the easement. Where it really becomes restrictive is, number of houses you can construct, number of subdivisions that can occur on that property. But when it comes to that agricultural enterprise, if it's directly tied to, whatever they're producing on the farm, there's a lot of flexibility there. And then we also, allow a lot of flexibility in around the farm structures themselves, for a lot of different uses, especially our plain set community. A lot of farmers have a secondary source of income, whether it's a woodworking shop or, they have a small welding business or whatever the case is. And those uses are permitted because we understand that that's complementary to their agricultural operation.
Just to follow up on that, one of our viewers, Barry, wanted to kind of clarify, when we say that this land is preserved, what does that really mean? Is it preserved in perpetuity? Will it be in farmland forever? Can you just kind of clarify a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, great question. And we reference in perpetuity, and people go, well, how long is that? And we like to reference it. It's forever and a day. We actually are required by the IRS that our easements are perpetual. So when a farm is preserved, in theory, it is preserved for as long as we can foresee in the future. And that easement agreement gets attached to the title of that property. So regardless of ownership, that farm is always preserved. Lancaster Farmland Trust responsibility really begins at the time that we preserve a farm. The exciting part is getting a farm preserved, but our responsibilities really start, when it's preserved, because now we need to go out there annually and monitor that. We need to enforce that easement. And we have funds set aside to do that. We have an insurance program that we access to provide resources for that. So when we say in perpetuity, that's truly the meaning. And the only time that easements, we can't remove easements at will, we're not legally able to do that. And the only time easements can be removed is through actions of the court.
Another question from our audience, Scott says that some municipalities are loosening zoning restrictions or zoning regulations to allow greater business use in ag zoned areas. How does that impact easements, and what are the ramifications?
Yeah, another great question. I mean, and I think Scott's, referencing the plain set community. This is a challenge in a lot of municipalities. It's, a lot of these small businesses start out on farms, and they're successful and they grow, and they get to the point where it doesn't make sense to have them on the farm anymore, for various reasons. And looking at trying to have areas where those businesses can go, but still have, are easily accessible by the plain set community because of limitations on transportation and things like that. I mean, I think it's critical for municipalities to be mindful in the context of where they elect to create these zones for these types of uses in relationship to existing protected land. And again, looking long-term of what do they want to see protected, because that particular type of use, may or may not be compatible against agricultural. What we find is the residential uses are probably not the best against an agricultural use. But, some commercial industrial uses against agricultural uses, can be compatible because you don't have the high population of where people are spending their evenings and eating their dinner on their back porch or things of that nature.
We have a question from one of our board members, Sid. Thanks for being here, Sid. And he wants to know more about the TDRs. You mentioned 6 municipalities are currently using the TDR, or transfer of development rights programs. Who determines the value of those TDRs, and how are they created?
Yeah, great question. I like to refer to TDR programs. I mean, it's almost in the context of the game of Monopoly, where Monopoly money is only good in that game. The TDRs only have value within that particular ordinance. outside of it, they really don't have any value. And the number of TDRs are generated by determination of the ordinance. So again, the Warwick example, they assign 1 TDR for every 2 gross acres of a piece of property. Other municipalities might look at how many subdivision potentials are permitted on that property, or how many dwelling units could be constructed to identify the number of TDRs. And then the value is really driven out from that. So, you know, on the receipt side of it for the developer, you know, what did they get out of that 1 TDR? You know, in Warwick Township, it's 3,000 square feet of impervious area. So parking lots, sidewalks, you know, footprint of buildings, it can range. Where in other cases, it might be higher density of residential units that's permitted. You know, maybe it's 2 additional residential units. And that really starts to drive what the value is. You know, in Warwick's case, because the township holds TDRs, and that's then a municipal asset, they have to go through a bidding process. You have other cases like in Manheim Township where, you know, developers are directed to farmers who have TDRs available, and then that price is negotiated. And they, you know, vary from $10,000 up to maybe $20,000 per TDR. So, you know, a lot of it can be, in that sense, can be market driven.
And I think in the Warwick Township example, Rock Lidditz purchased 149 TDRs for $450,000. And I think each of those TDRs preserve 2 acres of farmland. So that's an example of kind of the value of TDRs in Warwick. But Jeff, to your point, every municipality is developing their own TDR program. So it looks a little bit different.
And that's right. So it's hard, you know, the value of TDRs from one municipality to another is extremely different. You know, so it's really hard. You can't, it's not comparing apples to apples all the time. And they really only have value within that one municipality. It's really, they don't mean anything else outside of it.
We're going to take one last audience question before we announce next month's First Friday Forum and wrap. We have a question from Barry about what organizations like yours can do to further incentivize local governments to preserve their remaining farmland and open space. How are you thinking about that and working on that?
I mean, I think through advocacy work, you know, making relationships in the municipalities, being as a resource to municipalities. You know, if a municipality wants to be very thoughtful in how they protect, you know, open space and farmland, reach out to us. You know, we're here as a resource to help provide guidance, and you know, have access to technologies where we can do analysis and things like that. So, you know, I think we're always available as a resource for any municipality. But we probably need to do a better job of being out there more active with municipalities too.
Oh, Karen, I think you're still muted.
We have served on, we've had staff serve on ag advisory councils. We have advised municipalities about ag security areas. When a municipality might be interested in getting more farms preserved, we've done mailings into their municipality to try and generate some additional interest in preservation. But I think really one of the reasons behind the report was really to highlight the important work of municipalities in preserving Lancaster County's farmland. And so, as Jeff said, we're available in a number of different ways to help municipalities do that.
Well, we're coming to the end of our hour window for today's forum. I'd like to thank Karen and Jeff for being here, and thank Lancaster Farmland Trust for their tireless work on preserving farmland here in Lancaster County. Today's forum has been recorded. It will be available on our website and our YouTube channel, and we have countless other resources there for people who care about these quality of life issues in Lancaster County. Our next First Friday Forum will actually not be held on First Friday due to the Labor Day holiday. It'll be held September 10th, and that will be with our new Lancaster City Chief of Police, John T. Bay. As of now, we are planning to host that in person at the Ware Center. If anything changes, we will let you know. I encourage you all to join us and meet him and hear what the future of Lancaster City Police will look like under his leadership. I hope to see you then, and thank you everyone for joining us today. And thanks again, Jeff and Karen.
Thanks for having us, Diana.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.